But next we'll invite up Jamie Alexander with Project Drawdown, who will talk about this subject as well. Welcome, Ms. Alexander, and if you could state your name for the record, please. Did I get it? I'm learning.
Jamie Beck Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and committee members, and Dr. Roop for that wonderful context on climate action here in the state of Minnesota. So I'm going to focus now on solutions, climate solutions, and kind of digging more deeply into, based on the groundwork that Dr. Roop laid for us. And just on a personal note, I will say that I have a 5- and 7-year-old, and I lived in Northern California for most of my kids' early years, and moved away from Northern California because of the wildfires and moved to Minnesota. I consider myself a climate migrant. I know the topic of today's session is not on climate migration, but I think it underscores, and I will say I'm by far, not the only person that is thinking about leaving other parts of the world and moving here because of climate change. So I think that underscores the importance of this conversation, the importance of Minnesota taking a leadership position, the importance of planning for these moves that we will be seeing here in the United States and in the world. So thank you again for having me. So as you heard earlier from Dr. Roop, the science has been clear for decades that we know what is causing climate change, and we're starting to see the effects here in the state of Minnesota. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. Is this better? Oh, sorry, is this, okay, thank you. So we're starting to see the impacts here in the state of Minnesota now, after seeing it play out around the world in other frontline communities. So, we've heard a lot about, and I think, that over the course of the last few decades, there's been a lot of focus on the problem, right? And that's understandable. It's a big, massive problem. But that has turned into, there's been a lot of sort of vilifying, what is the source of the problem? Who are the bad guys? How do we, what's this like horrible thing that we're facing? And that's all important to understand how big this problem is and what the sources of the problem are. But now it's time to come together and focus on solutions. And that's really the focus of the organization that I work for, Project Drawdown. And in the climate solutions space, you will also see, as I think, we kind of touched on earlier in Dr. Roop's presentation, you'll see a lot of like competing claims and competing agendas, like nuclear is the only answer, or no, it's carbon sequestration, we'll be able to suck carbon out of the air someday, or capitalism is the problem. We need to tear down capitalism. And we're starting to see in the climate space this factioning over what the most important solutions are. And we need everything, but the science can really guide us to show us, from a neutral place, where are the biggest cuts in emissions that we can see. And so that's really the role that we play as a nonpartisan arbiter of climate solutions based on the data, based on what the atmosphere and the earth is showing us to be true. So Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization. We put out this book in 2017 that was a New York Times bestseller, really kind of, I think, showing the world that we have the solutions in front of us. Now it's a matter of scaling those climate solutions in the world. So to understand what the solutions to climate change are, we first set out to, it's first important to understand where greenhouse gases are coming from. And just to reiterate what Dr. Roop shared earlier, we know where greenhouse gases are coming from. And these numbers are global. What I'm providing now is global. It's not Minnesota specific numbers, but globally, electricity production is the biggest source of emissions, but not far behind is food, agriculture, and land use, almost equal with electricity production globally in terms of sources of emissions. And then we have industry. This is things like, manufacturing cars and computers, transportation. Globally is, 14% of our global emissions. Here in the United States, it's a much bigger share. And in fact, the biggest source of emissions in the United States. And then buildings. So looking at, energy usage in our buildings, and then other energy related emissions. So understanding where the emissions come from is an important first step. And again, You can, on our website, all of this information is available for free, but you can also sort of dig in more deeply to look at more specific sources of emissions within this picture. So understanding where emissions are coming from is a critical first step. Then we look at what are solutions that we can shift to in each of those sectors so that we can continue the way of life that we've built for ourselves. We can continue doing things and even improving upon our existing systems. In ways that are compatible with a thriving planet. So in the electricity sector, again, beginning with the biggest source of emissions, we need to shift the production of our electricity, enhance the efficiency of our buildings and our homes so that we need less electricity to begin with. In the food and agriculture and land use space, there's lots of solutions around shifting, addressing food waste. Right now, 1/3 of the world's food is never eaten. That's a crazy statistic. That is food that was grown, that farmers put their time and labor and love into, that was shipped around the world, that food was never eaten. Those were wasted emissions, wasted time. That's low-hanging fruit. That's a easily solvable problem. Shifting our diets toward more plant-rich diets, preserving our ecosystems. I could go on. There's lots of solutions here. I'm not going to go into each of these today, but we'll kind of just show at a high level that we know where the solutions are, and we also know their relative size. And the amount of greenhouse gas reduction potential each of them has. You can also look at, sort of what is the relative level of emissions reductions that we can see with various solutions. So rooftop solar, for example, this is ranked in terms of emissions reductions potential. Rooftop solar was the 10th most impactful solution. You can see the relative size of reduced carbon emissions we would see from that, how much it costs globally, but then what the savings are that we would see over time, what the return on investment of those solutions are. So that helps us make the case to CFOs of big companies or policymakers. Like, these solutions, they may cost money today, but if you take the long view, we'll see a tremendous amount of savings. I will move next to, I'm not going to go through all of these today, but so we know what the solutions are. We know the nouns. We sort of have the ingredients for this meal we're trying to build, but we haven't, until recently, we haven't had the recipe. We haven't had the verbs. Like, how do we put all of these solutions together to be able to scale climate solutions in the world quickly, safely, and equitably? How do we do that? How we know what the solutions are, but how do we scale them in the world? That's the focus of ours right now. And so the science can guide us here too. The science can tell us why urgency is so paramount. So one thing that is a recent learning of ours is that, the science actually shows us that carbon has a time value, similar to the time value of money. $1 invested today is worth a lot more than $1 invested a year from now because of the interest that $1 accrues over time. Similarly with carbon, you can see here the red line is sort of our current global emissions, and then that circle is where we are today. We need to see a really steep drop, a really steep reduction in our emissions. If we bend that curve like we need to, you can see in the blue here, these are avoided emissions that we will not have to make up for later. So it's sort of like if you're trying to lose 10 pounds in 2 months, you don't start your exercise regimen 2 days before you're going to get on the scale. You start it now so that your change in behavior has time to work. Similarly with carbon emissions, if we reduce or avoid emissions today, those emissions will have less time, in the atmosphere. They'll wreak less destruction, less extreme weather events, et cetera, and less work that we'll have to do in the future. the science also shows us how climate solutions can be deployed across time and how to prioritize. This gets at the question that was asked earlier. How do we prioritize? How do we know where we need policy making, where we need investment, where we need business practice change, where we need behavior change? We have limited time, so we can be pretty strategic about what solutions to focus on when. Again, so this chart here shows us, the red line again is where our carbon emissions are now. And at that first circle, you see we need to bend that curve. How in the world are we supposed to see these steep cuts in emissions in such a limited amount of time? Well, we have, what we call emergency brake solutions. So overall, we've analyzed 100 solutions, but there are some that are really super powerful and potent. And if we need to, really dramatically bend that curve, we can pull what we call emergency brakes. And again, these are global solutions. So what it looks like in the state of Minnesota will be different than what it looks like in Africa or other parts of the world. But emergency brake solutions are those solutions that can have a very, very immediate impact on our emissions, on our overall emissions. Those are things like slowing ecosystem degradation. So it's not about planting trees that in 20 years will absorb carbon, but it's about not cutting down the boreal forests and those ecosystems that are doing really important work for us, absorbing the CO2 that's already in that we've already put out into the air. Cutting methane leaks. Methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, contributing greatly to global warming. Cutting and fixing those methane leaks with technology we have today, we know where those methane leaks are coming from. Fixing those so that methane is not going into the atmosphere is a huge important solution that we should focus on this decade. Dramatic gains in energy efficiency. Again, if we, especially I live up in Duluth. The more we focus on energy efficiency, the less, the lower our bills and the less energy we need to use in the first place. And then lastly, cutting food waste and shifting diets. So these are sort of the very, the immediate solutions that we can focus on right now, while we do the work of building the infrastructure that we need for the future. So these are things like, laying the groundwork for, a reliable electrical grid, transportation infrastructure that enables more high-speed rail, so we don't all have to be in our personally owned vehicles all the time. So building these new low carbon systems, we need to focus on that now, but we may not see the emissions reductions cuts today from that the way we will in these with the emergency brake solutions. Then also solutions like social intervention. So protecting the rights of indigenous and native people to have their own land tenure, to own their own land. That's a climate solution because, research shows that they will prevent their land from being, destroyed and used for other purposes. And the equitable healthcare and education for women and girls around the world is a climate solution. It's a human right, and it's also a climate solution because educated women tend to make different decisions about the size of their families. They tend to be smallholder farmers in certain parts of the world. And then lastly, nature-based and new technologies, nature-based carbon removal and new technologies like carbon removal. Those are things that we will need. We will need to be able to sequester carbon and be able to have carbon dioxide removal projects, but those are not, I think what you're seeing from certain parts from the tech sector and also from the federal government and massive investments in carbon dioxide removal technologies, that's actually a pretty small part of the pie when you actually look at what we need to do. The vast focus of our efforts should be on reduction and avoidance, and then making up what we have to with new technologies in the future. And then the science can also show us, where there are what we call win-win solutions. So climate solutions are not just climate solutions. They are often things that actually help us build the world we want to live in anyway. So they'll be good for human health. They'll help us address, improve equity. They'll help us, they create good paying jobs. And so we did an analysis last year looking at our 100 climate solutions that we've analyzed to really look at where are there win-win solutions that also help address other things. So these are things like like installing an induction stove, and removing your gas stove. That actually really helps with indoor air quality. I have a kid with severe asthma, and that makes a huge difference in our home. There are things, restoring and protecting ecosystem provides income and work, food, water, and sanitation. So you can, getting, I think, toward the question that was asked earlier, there are solutions that are not just climate solutions. They also help us address other things that we want for the world anyway. And then again, so all of the information that I provided today is global, and our research at Project Drawdown is global in nature. So really looking at the atmospheric perspective, and so the data that we've provided is global, but there are efforts. This is one that is on the screen now. Drawdown Georgia is an example of the state of Georgia that took the Drawdown solutions and applied it specifically to their state, looking at their state's infrastructure, capacities of their workforce, their natural, their natural ecosystems, and then creating kind of a climate strategy based on their own unique context. And then up in Duluth, we have the Citizens Climate Action Plan, which was a similar effort to really look at what is our unique, what are the skills and the resources that we have in the Northland that we, that are most relevant for our climate action work. So, I'll just end by saying, I think we don't have to be out on a limb. I think to date, we've really been in the climate community has really sort of been like throwing things at the wall, just like, let's try everything. And we need a lot of solutions at once, but the science can really provide us with more strategic direction. We have very limited time. We have very limited resources to do what needs to be done. And so being grounded in the science can really help us, get very strategic around where to focus and how to get there. So thank you so much for your time. It's really an honor to have been with all of you today. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. I appreciate it. And questions from members? I think we have one from Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Alexander, right? Yeah, thanks. Just kind of two questions. In your presentation, you talked a little bit about shifting diets. Now, are you talking just like have people eat less at McDonald's and more at Burger King, or kind of what are you thinking? What are you thinking there?
A great question, Representative. Thank you. So yeah, that's really all about more kind of plant-rich diets. We know that plant-rich diets tend to be less carbon intensive than those that are meat heavy. So the process of the farming, the ranching that's done is very carbon intensive, and so there are different practices. There's regenerative agriculture. There's different kinds of farming that can enable more sustainable meat production, but really shifting toward more plants and less meat. As a general rule, is a climate solution.
Follow-up?
Just from us, like what, just kind of what kind of % of reduction in those particular areas you think would kind of make a big difference? As far as consumption and how much is being produced versus what would kind of make a major impact from your scientific perspective?
So great question, Representative. I am not a scientist. I should have said that at the outset, but that's a great question. I don't know what, I think as Dr. Roop said earlier, this is all about, it's a very challenging thing to quantify. The more action that we take, the better. There's an inverse relationship between, the emissions in our atmosphere and, or there's a direct correlation between the emissions that we put into the atmosphere and the extreme weather events that we see. So how much meat produced or avoided will correlate with a specific change in our temperature. I don't know, but it's we can provide the global picture, and the global picture is clear. Beyond that.
Come on. Mrs. Rupp, looks like she maybe answered.
Dr.
Sure.
Oh, please.
Come on. We got two chairs. Please just state your name again for the record.
Dr. Heidi Roop, University of Minnesota. The IPCC puts a global number on it, and it's about a 25% reduction, 1 meal a week-ish of meat, yields significant emissions reductions equivalent to some major industry. So it's sort of like one one meal, one hamburger. 25% less than what you would normally put on your plate is about the dietary, what is desired by the IPCC. And I will note that the health community that also contributes to that report notes that there are significant health outcomes that come alongside that reduction in meat consumption. So your doctor will be happy to.
Follow-up?
Thank you. Yeah, it just, Dr. Rupp, I can call you Dr. Rupp, right? Sorry, you are a scientist, but you kind of mentioned kind of the health side of things, and it was mentioned by Mrs. Alexander, kind of talking a little about the kind of healthcare aspect, and kind of, pushing that across the globe, women's health particularly, I think you mentioned. Kind of just what do you, and how do you quantify kind of that from a scientific standpoint? You said, if we're able to push that, globally, and expand it, kind of how that would affect and kind of what would that mean potentially to things, and from a scientific but a emission standard, but also just kind of a kind of feet on the ground type of a number.
Thank you, Representative. Are you referring to the health and education that I mentioned, and sort of reproductive health care and education of women and girls? Yeah, that's a challenge. That is, as most things in this space are, it's a challenging thing to put a number on. That's a longer term important solution. So we know that where women are, have access to equitable reproductive health care, and when they have access to education, they tend to make different decisions about the size of their families. I think I mentioned that women in many lesser developed countries tend to be the farmer for smallholder farms, and so more education correlates with higher farm yields, using less land but yielding more food, and so those are cascading impacts over time as those women take care of their households, make different decisions about the size of their families. That has implications and ripple effects across the entire system of solutions that we analyze, and that eventually is relevant for population size. But really, the focus of ours is on this is a fundamental human right to have access to healthcare and education. What number? I don't know, Dr. Roop, if you have a sense of numbers or relative size, but for us, I mean, that is a very sizable one, because it then addresses all of the other solutions as well in terms of reducing demand on our global supply.
You kind of think you might have a number. What do you think that number wise from your perspective and the research that you've done? Do you have kind of a rough number, or
A number in terms of the
kind of
relative
reduction,
size.
by that, yeah.
It's one of the most important solutions that we have, one of the most important climate solutions. Okay. And I would bucket that with not only healthcare and education for women and girls, but also the rights of indigenous and our Native American tribes to have access to their and ownership of their own land. Research shows that they are the stewards of their own land and prevent it from being deforested. So there are other these are social interventions, but they have cascading impacts for climate change. And I would say it's in the top 10 of our solutions. I couldn't quantify what CO2 reduction specifically we would see.
Sure.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have so many thoughts and ideas. I'm going to try to consolidate, but one slide that you skipped over was about, you called it refrigeration, but really it's indoor air conditioning, which is number one on the list. And when I have traveled globally, that is a huge impact that we don't do here in the United States, which is turn off air conditioning in the summer, or down in the south all year, depending on how far south you are. But if you go to Germany, which I have on occasion, they don't really use much air conditioning. So I thought that was an interesting slide to skip over, because we Americans really love our air conditioning. As you came into this room, and it was very cool, not that we had air conditioning, but the other thing is, the other thing I saw that was kind of missed is talking about grasslands and how impactful grasslands, as opposed to reforestation, is actually on the environment. And so if you want to talk a little bit about the sequestration of carbon in grasslands, it's double, triple, maybe even quadruple what it is with a forest. And then the last thing I'd like for you to address is when I was in Taiwan recently on a diplomatic mission, because Minnesota has a friendship we have a friendship caucus with Taiwan. So I just was there on a diplomatic mission with Representative Mahmoud Noor and Senator Rarick. And when we were there, we met some folks from Illinois because we were there with Midwest legislators. And the gentleman from Illinois talked about an amazing opportunity that I'm hoping that the two of these wonderful women know something about, which is a brand new operation that is underway and in planning in Illinois that will be probably the first commercial recycling facility for solar panels. Because as you know, if you've served any time on this committee, there is no global place to recycle solar panels efficiently at a commercial level. When I was at Idaho Falls, the Energy National Laboratory, the director there reiterated the fact that we have a growing problem. As you know, if you know anything about solar installation, at least 5% of those solar panels are damaged in transit and so go directly to a landfill because there isn't any other option. So I'm wondering if you could speak just briefly, one, about the power of grasslands and what's you doing in developing and restoring grasslands, which is much more powerful than forest. And then also if you know about this new facility that is in development and underway in Illinois. Thank you.
Ms. Alexander.
Thank you, Representative. I'll start with a global picture and then pass it to Dr. Roop for the Illinois question specifically. But thank you for calling out the refrigerant solution. I skipped over that one just to kind of give a broad sense of the solutions. But refrigeration, that's air conditioners and refrigerators, and the leak, the stuff that comes out of it, especially at the end of life of air conditioners and refrigerators, is really potent. So how we dispose of refrigerants at the end of life is really important, and it is a highly impactful solution. So thank you for that. And then your question about grassland. So we look at forest ecosystem protection and restoration broadly. And so included in that is grasslands, peatlands, mangroves, forests, and then even ocean climate sinks and there's seagrass. And so we look at all of that together as natural climate solutions. And that is a huge and very important solution, importantly, to protect and restore those ecosystems. And we kind of distinguish between protecting and restoring what we already have versus going out and planting new, 1 trillion new trees, which is, it's important, to plant new trees and to create new ecosystems that will absorb carbon. But those ecosystems will only start absorbing carbon in, like trees, for example, in 20 to 30 years once they are mature. Protecting those ecosystems that are already around and already absorbing carbon is even more important. So thank you for calling that out. And I'll pass to Dr. Roop on the recycling question.
Professor Roop.
Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you, Representative, for that question. I am not familiar with that, but I am very keen to learn and look into that. That sounds really exciting. I think into the question that we discussed earlier around sort of mining and minerals and accessibility. I mean, that recycling question and thinking about how to deploy solutions at scale is really going to be essential to this transition, right? We're not talking about an on-off switch, right? A lot of these things don't and cannot happen overnight. Some of them that we discussed, these emergency brake situations, some of those, we're talking about a time frame of years and decades. And I think thinking about these investments and learning from our peer states, and then dare I say, doing better, is a great opportunity to, again, address a range of impacts on our economy, our Minnesota jobs, and thinking about how to be a partner and a contributor to the solution space in our region, nationally and globally. And I will say to the question related to grasslands, it's a fantastic question, and the Nature Conservancy in I think 2019 or 2020, and I can send you the report. I actually referenced it for preparing my remarks, but I was unable to include it due to time. But they've outlined a range of the natural climate solutions and their benefits benefits specifically in Minnesota, the emissions avoided and the emissions reduced through investing in the preservation of our grasslands, reforestation. They discuss in there protecting histosols, so our sort of cultivated soils and peatlands, and they actually provide numbers and derive quantitative estimates for different interventions in natural climate solutions, specifically in the state of Minnesota. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but that work has been done, and I will say there are some questions that still remain unanswered, specifically related to peatlands and other things that we're really trying to resolve and think about, what are the benefits of and what can we get as far as both the emissions reductions as well as some of those co-benefits related to protection of water quality and the natural environment. So those numbers exist, and I'd be happy to send you that report if it'd be helpful.
Any follow-up, Representative O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be just thrilled to get more information about some of those things because I think they're rarely, if never, talked about, or rarely talked about maybe. And even in the presentation, we talked about reforestation, and and coming from a father and a grandfather who were nurserymen, so they grew trees for a living. That was certainly an impact, and it does impact the climate, but we just hardly ever talk about some of these other things that impact it so much more. So I just wanted to hear if they had numbers, and I'd love to get that back. And we also have an emerging crisis, really, with solar panels that were kind of at the beginning of the crisis, because even as they're putting up a brand new solar field, 5% of those are going to be destroyed and landfilled by the time they, before even getting installed. And so having some place where we can actually recycle them and recapture those precious metals, and I would say not leach into the ground the toxic metals inside, lead, cadmium, and others, I think are something that we absolutely need to pay attention to if that's the direction we're going to go. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. And I will just say, several of us are also on the Sustainable Infrastructure Committee, and this morning we had a great presentation about the IIJA and the IRA, and there's some great opportunities for partnerships all across the state with communities and offering capacity and expertise to cities and counties that will help take advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to us at this time that will also help with our climate issues. So anyway, any other questions? Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Ms. Alexander. In your presentation, or somewhere in there, I heard you talking about reducing meat consumption, eating more vegetables. I also heard reduction size of families in there. And let's say we start going down that path and people decide, no, we actually don't want to do that. We like our meat and we like our large families. I have 7 children, one still in the womb. And in my district, that's not uncommon. And so what if people just don't get on board with that? What do we do? What's the solution then? Thank you.
Ms. Alexander.
Thank you, Representative. I really appreciate that question. So we approach this conversation from a place of abundance. We don't, this isn't about what we have to give up, what we need to, what we need to sacrifice. It's about the world that we want to build and live in together. We do not focus on population size as a climate solution. We focus on health and education for women and girls as a climate solution. That has, in developing countries where those rights do not exist for women, in places in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where those rights do not exist, those have important implications. So we focus on the health and education of women and girls as the climate solution. It has the side effect of empowering women to be able to make whatever decisions about the size of their family they want. So there's no, that is, those are very distinct things, and our focus is on that we want to have a world where women and girls can choose. And they can choose along with their families what they want for their lives. And I think the meat question is a very challenging. I think we're getting at the heart of really difficult things. And I think it's important not to shy away from them. My grandfather was a coal miner, and my grandfather on the other side was a steel worker in central Pennsylvania. So I see, these are not black and white issues. And I appreciate that this committee is grappling with those issues head on. And, I think we're providing we're providing sort of the mirror. What is the atmosphere showing us? Well, it's showing us where these emissions are coming from. What we do with that is up to us, right? So we're providing, where the emissions are coming from, and then what potential solutions are. And it's up to us what to do with that. I don't think anyone would say stop eating meat altogether. It's, this is about sort of, we can move toward integrating more plants and into our diet, and we can make those decisions for ourselves and our families and our communities.
And we'll do a quick follow-up. We're running low on time. We've got another question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, great, then they're just suggestions that won't be enforced then, is your idea?
We are, thank you, Representative. We are, I don't think we would ever suggest enforcement of a meat limit. These have implications for farmers, for ranchers, for jobs, we recognize that these are deeply embedded values and livelihoods for people around the world. So we're providing, again, what the atmosphere is showing us, what potential solutions are, and it's up to different contexts, I think, to decide where to focus. There's lots of things to be done. If changing diets does not feel right for a community or for a family, great. But there are other things to be done. Thank you.
And Representative, we've got just a couple minutes left, so we'll be quick through the last couple questions. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've been reflecting on Representative Swedzinski's question about what can Minnesota do, what's the overall impact. Maybe Dr. Roop, if you were able to get everything that you would want, are we an island unto itself, or are we a part of a broader system around the Midwest and around the country?
Professor Roop, sorry. Sleep with the wheel over here.
Chair Ecom, Representative, thank you for that question. No, we would not be an island. We might be an island that's leading the way or paving the path. But we are certainly surrounded by states and counties, and you don't even have to look too far to see local jurisdictions that are leapfrogging the state and the federal government, seeking to prepare and deploy solutions because it's what they desire for their communities. So I think to the point that there are historic federal investments and dollars to be had, I have here on great authority that the challenge is getting the money out the door to communities that need it. And so there are going to be communities around the nation, and hopefully in Minnesota, equipped and have the capacity and the resources to access those dollars to invest in solutions in their communities. So I think as we pave the way, Minnesota is no doubt a leader in this space in our region. But there are other states in this nation that are ahead of us and that we can look to for examples. Their missteps can be our opportunities to leapfrog them. And as it's snowy outside, maybe it's not so bad to be an island in some cases, because you might have the waves lapping on the shore with the sunshine. A girl can dream. But I think everyone benefits from leadership no more than Minnesotans when Minnesota leads. But the Midwest benefits, the nation benefits, and most certainly the world wins when we all choose to act.
And I want to let Representative Altendorf have the last question.
Thank you,
Oh,
Madam
I'm sorry,
Chair.
Larry had a follow-up.
Yeah, so just
Sorry, 1 second.
my apologies. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think some of the questions, when we ask what can Minnesota do, we also have to say, how many jobs will we build by doing this? What kind of industries can we help create? How much exporting of a technology will we do? How much additional health of our system, of our citizens will we create? So I like the question, but I just view it that there's so much potential here for what we can do that I think that the answer, we have to think more broadly on the answer than just what is the impact of trying to isolate to what only the climate, the specific degree change is. It's a much broader impact. Thank you.
And we'll go quickly to
I will
Representative
go.
Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both of you for your expertise today. Really enjoyed so much of it. I just want to challenge this committee and to also say, I hear contradictions, and oftentimes government, we create a law or a mandate, and that creates another future problem. And a couple of the contradictions that I heard today was moving to plant-rich diets. And then at the same time, we were talking about moving to solar, and we were talking about moving thousands of our very rich agricultural land here in Minnesota into solar farms. And this is a huge concern of mine. So have we done the analysis on that as we are taking away our rich soil, that, and we're moving to also at the same time saying we're moving to a plant-rich diet, how much extra land do we need to provide that plant-based diet? So that would be one thing. And I just really appreciate Representative Hollins, I think, brought up the agricultural impact, and this has to be a concern. We are, one of the leading states in agriculture, and we cannot hurt that agriculture economy. It will affect the whole Minnesota economy. So we have to really walk and proceed carefully as we are making these very important decisions. But my question was, have you done an analysis when you move to that plant-rich diet, when you're moving us away from meat, based, how much extra land do we need to provide for that?
Thank you for that question, and we'll give you just a really quick response if you can, and there'll be time you guys can connect afterwards if you want as well.
Great.
Ms. Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. The contradictions are everywhere, I think, is what I want to say. We need to transform every sector across every part of society and every part of the world. We are not, to the earlier question, we are not, no one sector is an island. And this is a system of solutions that we need to integrate holistically, and that will look different in different places. Again, I think, my job is to provide sort of the global picture of what the solutions are, and that will look different in different contexts, based on values, based on capacities, based on skill sets, based on natural resources. But I think calling out that this is hard stuff, and there are inconsistencies to be grappled with, is something that needs to happen at the local level, I think.
I want to thank both of our presenters for coming and being here today. I want to thank everybody for the great conversation.